Hello, this is the RPG Crawler, and welcome to another review, this time of a remaster of a classic dungeon crawler from the PlayStation Portable era. This will actually be the first in a two-part series of reviews, as Class of Heroes and Class of Heroes 2G were both recently remastered as of this recording, and the remasters have finally been localized into English and released as a complete edition. While the complete edition was targeted for the PC, PS5, and the Switch, I will be focusing on the PC versions which have been made available separately. This review will cover Class of Heroes Anniversary Edition, a remaster of the Class of Heroes game originally released on 2008 on the PSP, which had an additional release on the PS Vita and then the Japanese version of the remaster in 2018. Developed by Zero Div and now being published by Acquire and P-Cube in the West, the latter of which were kind enough to send me a review copy. As Class of Heroes Anniversary Edition is a remaster, I will be covering both the game itself as well as any additional changes where applicable. I do have a little bit of a history with this one, having played the original PlayStation Portable version, although I admittedly didn't advance as far in that version as I would have liked. Class of Heroes is a classic, first-person, grid-based dungeon crawler similar to the Wizardry series. In fact, the original version of Class of Heroes back in the day had a staff member who had previously been connected with the Wizardry X Unlimited students, although just how well connected the games are is somewhat open to debate. What I can say is that in terms of class structure and gameplay mechanics, the two series are incredibly similar, especially this particular entry. What this means, practically, is that if you enjoy the Wizardry series and its derivatives from the later years, you will stand a good chance of enjoying this game as well. The plot has you assembling a group of students in an academy for adventurers. You can develop an entire roster of students selecting from various races as well as various professions or majors. After a brief orientation in which you get introduced to the facilities of Particus Academy, you are given a series of tasks or examinations which serve as quests for this game. They will take you into dungeons, and you must explore them in an increasingly thorough manner. During these explorations, you will uncover a plot involving a teacher's missing sister, which then extends into having traveled through all the dungeons in the region, encountering other academies which you may then use as your home base, and then eventually facing a threat to the various dungeons. Upon starting Class of Heroes Anniversary Edition, you'll immediately see some of the new additions. In addition to continuing or starting a game, loading an old one, and exiting, you can also visit a music and artwork gallery. These galleries contain artwork as well as music not only from Class of Heroes, but from its sequels Class of Heroes 2 and Class of Heroes 3. After starting the game, you go through the orientation which I mentioned in the plot section, and then are dropped into actually interacting with the campus and creating characters. Particus Academy serves as the main hub, although you will acquire other academies to work with later in the game. They all have similar facilities, which I'll go into. The dormitory serves as similar purposes to the inn in Wizardry games and similar ones. It allows you to edit your parties or roster out of the current character roster. You can rest your characters as well as utilize a storage. Each of the academies you encounter during the game has a different storage area you can use, separate from each of the others. There will also be a report section that allows you to interact with NPCs residing in the area, as well as access various quests that you have accepted elsewhere. The report section is individually available in all of the areas of the campus and just deals with that particular area. The campus store is exactly what it says on the tin. This will allow you to buy and sell material of various categories, as well as to uncurse and identify items. All items must be identified before use, and there are a few classes that can be identify them without the need to run back and pay to the campus store. This is notable since many items require a great deal of money to properly identify, in fact almost as much, if not more, than just simply buying or selling the item. Also notice that while items may be limited by class, especially in terms of weapons and armor, they may also be limited by race. So, for instance, some items are simply too large for some small races like fairies to wield. There are cards that can be crafted that can be combined into items in order to add that race to the item allowable list and let you use non-standard items. The laboratory is where you engage in the game's crafting system, alchemy. There are a number of broken items and materials that you can find in the dungeons. In fact, they make up the vast majority of your loot and then may be combined into additional items. This is useful since the store generally only carries a limited supply of certain items, enough to perhaps equip 1 or 2 parties, but not more than that. Many of the better items that you find in the dungeon will require some assembly. I should note that assembling an item is not only requiring the materials themselves, but also money, almost as much money as you get just from selling the item. In fact, I think it's exactly the amount as you sell the item for, so simply crafting things and then selling them is not going to earn you money because you'll spend it to craft them in the first place. It can, however, be good to recoup your money if you're assembling something for the first time and then discover that it's not really an upgrade or nobody can use it. The recipe section in the laboratory allows you to review the recipes of items that you can craft. You have a number of recipes to start and can gain more by buying the recipes from the store. However, a recipe is not actually required to make an item. You can make it through trial and error or simply by looking it up in a guide online. The infirmary is where you can get characters treated for various maladies. The most important one is simply the treatment section, which allows you to revive characters once they die. Characters who are dead can actually fail to be raised, in which case they turn to ash. This may subsequently allow them to be raised, albeit at a greater cost, but once again, if they fail, they may simply be gone for good. Other options in the infirmary are outpatient for characters with lesser status effects that you can handle through your own spells, recall, and donate, which allows you to make or trade money for experience. The library is basically the quest hub. The bulletin board in the library allows you to accept quests that are currently waiting for you to pick up, as well as review completed quests. The bulletin board in the libraries of each of the 3 academies has a separate quest list for, each academy. Then there's the yearbook, which allows you to view the various stats, such as monsters you encountered, items you picked up, maps you've uncovered, and so forth. The office is where you'll be creating new characters or otherwise modifying them. Edit allows you to edit your current party, similar to the same option in the dormitory. Enroll allows you to create a new character from scratch. Browse allows you to look through all your characters in your character roster, whether they're in your party or not. Course allows you to change the class of a character, which functions similarly to wizardry in that it allows you to keep certain basic statistics and spell lists while resetting everything else to 0 and allowing you to proceed from the beginning. Most classes actually get a kind of rebirth skill when they're very high level that lets you keep more of their stuff, so a lot of times it's worth leveling to that. Finally, Excel allows you to delete a character permanently. The principal's office only has one option besides report, and that is hypnosis. Hypnosis allows you to change a character's alignment. The final option in the campus is where you can explore the world. This offers 3 options. Explore allows you to explore dungeons that are connected to the point at which you're at. Resume allows you to restart an out party or a party currently in another dungeon or in another area, either through you abandoning them or through you saving the game and then exiting. And finally, the world map shows the various areas of the world and how they connect with each point besides 2 areas on the map being connected by an underground dungeon road. So you basically have to go from dungeon to dungeon to move from town to town, unless you buy an expensive Wyvern Summon ticket. Of course, you can also check a general options menu in town. This allows you to check the status of anybody in your current party, access your inventory and items, attempt to cast spells from one of your party members, change the formation of your party, review the quest that you're on, change the settings of the game, and access help on the basic controls. And of course, save the game and just exit it. When you create a character, you're faced with a few options. You may enter the character's name, select their gender, select their race, their alignment, as well as their major. Characters are generated with a randomized pool of bonus points, which they may distribute amongst their ability scores. The ability scores are Strength, Wisdom, Faith, Vitality, Agility, and Luck. The bonus is relatively random and operates in a sort of exploding manner where it is relatively easy to generate a small number of bonus points. Generating towards the maximum of that may give the opportunity for even more bonus points, and then so on for several times. I myself generated a character with 40 bonus points when creating a character for the first play I was doing through to get footage for this, although that will take a while if you're intending to do it. You can, of course, just exit the screen and enter it to re-roll your stats, and that's actually incredibly useful. You can then select your courses and your race based on what you roll. Certain races are better at certain courses based on their starting stats and all. Courses have a sort of requirement for stats, with basic courses being relatively easy to qualify for. More advanced courses like the Valkyrie or the Ninja require a substantially higher set of ability scores to qualify for them. Alignment can not only limit which classes you can take, but also will affect the party's affinity for one another, which can impact how well they recharge their group skills, as well as other things such as stat growth on level up. In fact, that's the most important part. Affinity is also affected by your character's race. I will comment that for those of you familiar with the original, this is the main portion at which one of the features of the remaster becomes evident, and that there has been a new translation and localization to English. A lot of the races and some classes have been somewhat renamed, with the races being brought more in line with what you'd expect of the rest of the series, and this is interesting since a lot of the courses have requirements that are very similar to the Wizardry series, actually, if not identical to what you would need to roll in a Wizardry game in order to qualify for them. The new translation extends to items and quests, so if you're using an old guidebook from the original PlayStation Portable version, it may differ in terms of what things are called and make certain things a little bit difficult to look up. I'll also state that the translation seems to have gone towards the teacher's speech and quest text as well. And I will admit, as I said before, I did not proceed very far in the original PSP version, but it seems like the very character of some of the teachers was somewhat modified by this new translation. I'm not sure whether that's for the better or not. If you're a fan of the original, you're welcome to fill me in on that in the comments. Just a quick rundown in terms of races. There are human, elf, dwarf, gnome, that used to be the Erdegeist, Kulaz, that used to be the halflings, fairy, they used to be sprites, Felper, Bahamut, they used to be the drakes, Diablos, and Celestia. Courses are the fighter, mage, priest, thief, bishop, summoner, ranger, alchemist, psionic, monk, samurai, valkyrie, lord, kunoichi, and ninja. Courses like bishop and alchemist allow for in-dungeon item identification, while summoner, what used to be the evoker, is the only class that allows you to learn the summon spells at the bottom of each dungeon. Once you've got a party equipped and are ready to go, dungeon exploration is the meat of the entire game. It is done from a first-person perspective with your characters listed on either side of the screen. Movement is a grid-based, and encounters are generally randomized, although there are static encounters as well. There's traps, doors, locks, and special tiles that you can run into in the actual dungeon itself. Each dungeon stretches between 2 points on the world map. These dungeons are composed of one or more maps on the right side and then the left side with a central inner sanctum between them. In order to travel from point to point on the map, one must travel through one side of the dungeon, through the sanctum in the middle, and then out the other end. The sanctum is generally where you can find a summon spell if you have a summoner in the party, as well as the entrance to a labyrinth beneath each sanctum. These labyrinths are accessible somewhat later in the game. Of note is that each part of the dungeon, not including the sanctum, is drawn from a randomized pool of maps. This may give the impression of randomized level design, but these maps are actually predetermined, selected from a pool of maps that can be used between dungeons. Furthermore, once you have solved a map, once you have mapped it completely, even if it's used in a different dungeon later on, it's still mapped. If you come upon it again, even the locks that you've undone will remain undone and the level will be mapped out, which can allow you to essentially progress very swiftly through certain dungeons once you've mapped them out, and then, if you encounter it later, then boom, free dungeon. At the very beginning of the game, you have access to only a certain number of these dungeons or roads, however this expands as you progress on the main quest. You may acquire maps which allow you to actually map the dungeons, and certain exploration spells can be very useful in finding your way through other dungeons. Special tiles can make dungeon exploration interesting, such as electrified tiles, water tiles, one-way tiles, rotation tiles, and so forth. Between these and the mystic locks that bar off certain sections of a dungeon until they're activated, this can make exploring some dungeons range from challenging to tedious. I would recommend, if you're exploring these, to fully solve any of the more tedious levels, simply so that you don't have to go back and do them over and over again when you encounter them later on. As far as combat goes, when you encounter groups of monsters, they may not necessarily be identified right off the bat. While particular types of creatures may always use the same general icon, several types of creatures can use the same icon just with different colors. Groups of monsters can be truly massive, and there can be several groups at once. Generally speaking, you can only melee the first rank, and their rank can only melee your characters, although if you have some sort of medium-range weapons, sometimes that can move onward. So it's balanced somewhat in that regard. Magic can reach all ranks, whether it be from the monsters from your party or for the party to the monsters. In the upright corner is a morale gauge that fills when you defeat monsters based on your character's affinity with one another and may be used to execute party skills. Party skills require the use of more than one character and are generally either incredibly effective attacks or very useful defenses or just the ability to escape for free. Using a party skill will improve your character's affinity towards one another. Aside from party skills, each character may execute a certain action on their turn. Characters may attack, defend, use a spell in terms of magic, use an item, change equipment, or run. Certain characters may acquire other abilities, especially as they advance in level. A Valkyrie's Desperate Fright, for instance, appears as another option and allows a more powerful attack at the cost of defense. A Psionic may put up a magical barrier that absorbs attacks, a Thief may hide and then subsequently jump out and rob an enemy later. A Summoner may put up a summon circle that allows them to boost their summon creatures, and so on, with each course potentially having different abilities. Certain enemies may have elemental weaknesses or strengths which you may exploit through the use of spells or equipment that you have imbued with certain elemental powers. For the most part, this is actually not very necessary, but occasionally it comes in very handy, and then some creatures are just almost impossible to damage unless you hit their elemental weakness. After combat, or in certain places of the dungeon, you may uncover chests. Chests require a character with a thief skill, such as a thief or a ninja, to inspect it, and may then either be disarmed by the thief or ninja or by a spell. And honestly, that's all you really need to know about Class of Heroes. You basically go through dungeons in order to access new areas of the map, accomplish quests, keep grinding those same dungeons over and over again. I will admit that if you followed the different quests, you're actually not going to be doing that much grinding, since simply the act of traveling from one area to another due to the expense of shortcut items such as the Wyvern tickets and such will naturally level your characters up quite a bit. It's only if you want to min-max a character or switch them around to different classes that you're probably going to run into any grinding beyond just the basics. If anything, the only grinding I would feel the need to do is for item drops in order to improve the equipment of characters. This can actually be mitigated once you reach the point at which you are entering other schools, since there is an arena available at a different school which allows you to fight boss monsters that you've encountered over and over again, adjusting their level for a challenge which can allow you to very quickly farm both experience and drops. You may also select a different custom portrait or outfit once you reach another academy and unlock the fitting room, some of which may come with stat modifications. Like all great dungeon crawlers, it is simply a matter of entering the dungeon, killing monsters, coming back with loot, and repeating until you reach the end of the game. So I'll go into Class of Heroes 2G in another video, but what do I think about Class of Heroes Anniversary Edition? Well, on its own, it preserves the play of the original PlayStation Portable game, which means that if you like that one and are looking for more, it's simply the same game with a different translation. It's not going to be providing anything outstandingly new, although from my perspective it actually is quite a bit more streamlined of an experience. There have been a few quality of life improvements, especially in terms of moving around the dungeon or simply accessing help from certain menus. If you don't like dungeon crawlers, then you're probably not going to like this one. If games like Wizardry and the other such first-person dungeon crawlers are games that you played before and that you enjoyed, but you simply haven't played Class of Heroes, it'll depend on how hardcore you are. Class of Heroes is a little bit on the simpler side in terms of that. I wouldn't say it's a casual dungeon crawler, but it's certainly more friendly than some of them from that perspective. As far as the remastered elements, I noticed that the graphics are a little bit cleaner as suited for the higher resolution monitor, although this is simply a matter of upscaling the line art from the original. They maintain the cutesy, colorful look of the original design through and through. I was using a controller to play through it rather than the keyboard and mouse, and as far as that goes, I found no inherent flaws with the port. In fact, that's something that plagues a lot of ports in that it simply doesn't transfer to a computer. Well, in this case, it transfers perfectly fine. I had as much fun playing it on my PC as I did on my PSP so long ago, if not more, simply because I didn't have to squint at a very small screen. The storyline is a relatively simple and kind of cute one, although its division amongst several quests can take a bit longer to put together. This is kind of par for the genre as a whole, though. All in all, it is a competent little dungeon crawling romp that does little to advance the genre, at least it didn't when it first came out, and it still doesn't. But it does present a fun little setting that is a little bit more lighthearted than many of its competitors. Quality of life tweaks such as an auto battle and an auto run through the dungeon that allows you to plot courses across the map make exploration relatively swift as well. I'm not entirely certain whether these were in the original or not. I probably should fire up my PSP and check because it's literally right there, but well, whatever, I'm already recording. Either way, they make for a quick and streamlined play experience once you get into the game. The addition of the new musical tracks is interesting, although once again, if you've been a fan of the series for a while, you may be familiar with a lot of the extra art galleries and music involved. I'm not, and I'm not certain how the music stacks up against the original. I seem to detect some differences here and there in some of the tracks when they're going on, although that may simply be me misremembering how the originals go, or simply the difference between outputting them to a PC versus a PSP speakers. If anything, the main complaint I had with Class of Heroes was not necessarily anything regarding the remaster, nor anything regarding the play or even the grinding, which I didn't find that particularly troublesome. I did find annoying there are certain level designs that are just extremely tedious. Things like simply rows upon rows of doors leading to teleporters, or one teleporter just teleports you back to the beginning. So it's effectively a maze that resets you and makes you run all the way back to where you were just based on your guess. Or things like a map with a lot of interspersed lava pits and then magic dead zones, so you have to have a group that can either float naturally or enough mage spells to get you over one at a time. And I forgot to talk about the mage spells. They don't use an MP point in this system. They use something akin to the Vancian spell slots from the version that they did in Wizardry back in the day, where you have spells of certain levels and then you can cast that many levels in a day, although you don't actually have to prepare them at first, which is good. These maps, though, like you'd have spirals that would go into a spiral, and then you'd have to double back out of the spiral. They're just there to just take your time. They went from interesting to outright annoying on occasion when I encountered them. Fortunately, once you solve these, they generally have a shortcut to the exit after you undo a few locks. So those were the kind of maps that I took special care to explore thoroughly and open all the doors on. Which is funny, because the maps which were less annoying, I ended up spending less time on just because I didn't feel the need to go through and thoroughly unlock them. With all that said, I was actually very pleased with Class of Heroes Anniversary Edition, and would very much recommend it to fans of Wizardry-like dungeon crawlers, with a caveat that's not quite as in-depth as some of the newer ones eventually ended up being. If anything, I hope this inspires P-Cube to try to do more translations and localizations of certain other dungeon crawler games that have not yet made their way to the West. I will take a look at Class of Heroes 2G Remastered in another video. For now, this has been the RPG Crawler with my look at Class of Heroes Anniversary Edition. As always, I will put a link where you can pick it up. Remember to leave a like if you like what you've seen, comment if you got any feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content. Until next time, take care and goodbye. And if you are still watching, I would like to take the opportunity to thank my supporters, the top tiers of which are listed on the screen, without whose support I would not have been able to offer the variety of content that I have on this channel throughout the years. If you're feeling particularly generous and would like to join them, you can support the channel. There are a variety of options to do so. I have a Patreon, a Subscribestar, as well as channel memberships enabled. If you are not in a position to contribute, simply leaving a like, a comment, or sharing my videos are all wonderful ways to help the channel grow without spending a dime, and are all greatly appreciated.